Today we're going to talk about images of epithelium and glands. So we will start out and survey various types of tissues that have different types of epithelium in it. It could be transitional, it could be columnar, it could be squamous cells that we will be able to see, as well as look at glands and the secretions. Serous and mucous secretions will be the ones that we were looking at. If this information is useful to you, please consider subscribing and telling your friends about the information. Thank you. Here on the terminal ileum, we see simple columnar epithelium. We see some goblet cells releasing their secretions. And we see the simple columnar epithelium of the secretory cells. And we see this flocculent material at the very end, which is the brush border, which is composed of microvilli, like finger-like projections that have actin filaments projecting off the surface of the cells. And so if we look at that, we can see the specimen here. We can see this is low mag. We can see the muscle layer out through here, the muscularis externa. This is a muscularis mucosa, and this is the mucosa, which is muscularis mucosa, lamina propria, the connective tissue here, and the epithelium. But today we're supposed to see the epithelium, simple columnar epithelium with goblet cells and absorptive cells with a brush border that we can see there. Now remember, all these cells still on the basement membrane. We can't see that unless you have your PAS staining material that we have. So the next slide is the trachea, and here we see the trachea 40. Unfortunately, I don't have 40, but you can see it has pseudostratified columnar epithelium with cilia, and so here we can see the ciliated cilia projecting, which are mobile components, projections on the cell that have an axoneme inside these. So these have doublets of microtubules which allow it to move, and that is the mechanism by which the lungs cleans the debris out of the lungs and up the trachea. Also note that the basement membrane, or this is actually the basal lamina, is very, very thick in this epithelium. So I don't really have one of those, but I do have some respiratory epithelium that we have. Look down here, go to the very bottom. This is the olfactory epithelium, but we can see that there's respiratory epithelium there. This is the nasal cavity, I should have said, is not olfactory epithelium. This is the respiratory epithelium, which is what we see in their basal bodies, but these are the cilia projecting off the surface. In this area, you don't really see a thickened basement membrane like you do in the trachea that we were seeing in there. So what we were supposed to see there is this ciliated cells, pseudostratified columnar epithelium. It looks like there are more than one layer, but there's only one layer because all cells touch the base. They don't all touch the top, but they do touch the base. And in the trachea, you see this thick basal lamina as well. And another type of epithelium, which is pseudostratified columnar epithelium, is we've got stereocilia, very, very long branch microvilli that we saw before, and we can see that in the epididymis. So these are microvilli, but very, very long, and also they are branched. They differ from cilia. Cilia are long projections that have microtubules, but both of these, microvilli and stereocilia, both have actin filaments inside them. And so if we look at the epididymis, this happened to be the epididymis, and you show the connective tissue around the outside, and we can see some of these projections. There's sperm in the middle, connective tissue in through there. You can see fibroblasts, collagen bundles in through there. But if you look at the epithelium, you can see very, very long microvilli. These are stereocilia, and you can see the pseudostratified columnar epithelium. You have some different heights of cells, but they are basically a columnar epithelium that that you see. So if we look back at this, another one is the urinary bladder. Urinary bladder has transitional epithelium. So there's more than one layer, and usually they have kind of rounded ends of the surface cells, the basal cells in through here. But instead of having squamous, they're kind of cuboidal in shape, and they have a projection that we see in through there. So if we look at this, there's the bladder. This is the outside of the bladder. This is a muscle layer of the bladder. So we see smooth muscle cells, collagen in through there. With these are fibroblasts that we see the nuclei thereof. But in the lumen is where we're going to see the transitional epithelium. So this is transitional epithelium, which you can see how the surface kind of pokes out and bulges out through here. So there's more than one layer, not flattened cells on the surface. They're actually bulging out, and characteristic of transitional is these cells that kind of bulge out on the surface. So this is the epithelium in here, muscle in through, smooth muscle layers, and you can see the muscle kind of runs to different clumps of smooth muscle. So if you look at each one of these are the smooth muscle nuclei, and these would be like individual cells in through here that we would have. Of course, you would have capillaries in there as well. I can't really see one right off. So here we can see the smooth muscle cells projecting down through there, and this is the nuclei of those cells. Here we can see some blood vessels or arteriole here and here. I'm not sure what this may be, a little bit of nerve in through there. Another blood vessel. Here you can see the arteriole, you see the smooth muscle cells in the wall, the simple squamous epithelium that lines the lumen of this arteriole, and this little venule as well. Little venule endothelial cells. These are red blood cells and white blood cells that we see in there. The next one that we will see will be the ureter. The ureter has transitional epithelium in its surface as well, and we're going to take a look at the ureter. This is the ureter, has different layers of smooth muscle on the outside to squeeze the urine out from the down the tube toward the urinary bladder. So this is the ureter is between the kidney and the bladder. And so if we look inside here, we can see the transitional epithelium again, a similar type thing to what we saw before. We have cells all the way on the surface. The scallopness of it is not as elaborate as what you see in the urinary bladder, but this is transitional epithelium with kind of cube cells at the very end. If you look inside there, we see muscle. You can see some nice muscle cells here, which are cigar-shaped cells. You see arteriole here, a little venule, a little small vein right in through there. You can see our little arteriole there, a capillary in through there, and we would have simple squamous epithelium there. Nice smooth muscle cells running through there. There's a nucleus. Each cell has a single nucleus, and if you cut it in cross section, as you see here, you can see that the nucleus is kind of in the center of the cell. We can see some other cells. These are probably plasma cells in through there. Another one in through there that we'll talk about later on with connective tissue. Another characteristic we want to see is a difference between stratified squamous epithelium, which is keratinized like you see in skin, and non-keratinized, which you see in the oral cavity or in the wet surface or in the vagina, someplace esophagus, someplace we have stratified squamous epithelium. And this is what we're going to see. This is skin, and so it's keratinized epithelium. You can see it's all very hardened in through there. This is stratum corneum. This upper layer here, stratum granulosum, where you see the granules in through there, spinosum, and a stratum basale that we see here. Is keratinized epithelium there. In contrast to here, in the tongue and the oral cavity, we see kind of flattened cells on the surface, stratified squamous, more than one layer of cells, as you see, but they're not hardened on the surface, as you saw in the previous one. So you see live cells sitting up here at the surface, where these cells are dead, denucleated. Just the matrix is what's inside those cells at the very end. And so we see that again, keratinized dead cells on the surface. Non-keratinized, you have live cells on the surface, just sloughing off at the top. Then look further at the tongue. We can see the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium we just saw, and we can see the serous and mucous glands that we've seen before. So let's just take a look at that again. The tongue, here we see the non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, and then we see there's venial and it looks like a swollen gland there. I don't know what that is. But here's the arteriole, and here we see the serous and the mucous glands. These are skeletal muscle. You can see the striations in the muscle. You see the nuclei in the periphery and multi-nucleated cells there. These are capillaries in between there. So this is a small little capillary, another one here, here, and here. These are in the endomysium. There's a plasma cell right there that we could see. So mucus, remember mucus have a nuclei at the bottom. The serous have spherical nuclei, flat nuclei versus spherical nuclei that we see. Here we see fibroblasts, and these are bundles of collagen that we see. We see fat cells, there's a nucleus, and this is a fat cell that we couldn't see. So the next one is the esophagus, and we can see the esophagus has stratified squamous epithelium, which are flattened cells on the surface, and the very one, and they're non-keratinized, as what you would want to expect. So we look at 53, and we can see there, this is esophagus. Esophagus has the connective tissue out through here, and it's got a muscle layer in through there, and then more connective tissue, and then stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized, is what we see on the surface. So this is the lamina propria. This would be the epithelium on the surface, stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized, as what we saw before. So that's the esophagus. And then skin, as we mentioned to you before, we have keratinized cells in the outer layer of the epidermis, as opposed, and then the dermis, hypodermis, that we see. Again, this is keratinized cells that we have. If we look at 29 in the connective tissue, we can see the eccrine sweat glands. So this is the secretory portion, and this is the duct portion. The duct portion is stratified, more than one layer, stratified cuboidal. The only place I know in the body that you have stratified cuboidal is in the sweat duct, not in the gland itself. And also in the gland you can see another type of epithelium. These are myoepithelium, and you can see along projections of these cells they form a grape around it. You can see it. So these are the myoepithelial cells that squeeze the secretions and causes secretions to be released. And here we can see this is 29. So if we go to looking at 29, we can look in here and we can see these are the ducts, which is stratified cuboidal, and this is the glandular portion, and the little pink you see around it is the myoid epithelium that squeezes it. Here you can see the myoid cells that goes around on the outside. These are the nuclei, these flattened cells that are around. You see that have the myoid cells on the secretion. There's the arteriole, you can see the endothelial cell, the smooth muscle cell, collagen bundles, fibroblasts, that we see another duct, and this is nerve nerve. And you have connective tissue around the nervous tissue. This would be Schwann cells, which would be a myelinated axon that we see there. So, and here we can see how nerve is kind of more gray than the connective tissue around it. Collagen here and nerve there, collagen there. And you can see where the nerve is kind of slendering along, and you can see it's kind of wavy as it's somewhat coiled up in the case of whenever it's not being stretched out. And so here's 31. We can see secretions of sebaceous glands, another type of gland that we have. Basically, that secretion has a hologram secretion, namely that the whole cell is a secretion. And sebaceous glands, they empty out into hair follicles, and we can see that in slide 31. So let's take a look at slide 31. Don't have 31. Slide 31. Don't have slide 31, but that's what you would see would be sebaceous glands and them opening out into a hair follicle. Here we can see slide 66. We have the sebaceous glands again. This is a hair follicle that we have. Apical sweat glands. Apical sweat glands discharge their contents in the hair follicle just as does the sebaceous gland. The sebaceous gland is a waxy type substance that makes your hair slick. There's also acrine sweat gland, which is typical sweat glands with the duct that's stratified cuboidal, and that discharges on the surface of the skin. So these two discharge in the hair follicle or on the surface of the skin. Apical sweat gland is associated with like marking of animals and things, usually found around the anal junction there, and you use the hair follicles as a paintbrush to kind of brush the scent around. And here we can see that in this specimen. So this is goblet cells that you see, the simple columnar epithelium in the rectum that we see, and then very abruptly we change from that to stratified squamous epithelium associated with the outside and skin. And here we can see the apical sweat glands here that discharge. You can see they're discharging here into the hair follicle, and here we can see the sebaceous gland discharging into the hair follicle. Here's a hair shaft right here that we can see there's a hair shaft. These are the apical sweat glands that discharge into there. This is the sebaceous gland. Sebaceous gland, remember, has the hologram secretion that secretes in there. Here you can see the sebaceous gland empty out into a hair follicle. More apical sweat glands in through there, more sebaceous glands. Are you looking inside the intestine, or are you looking at the surface of skin at the anal junction? And there is a sphincter associated with the closure of that junction. So basically, as I mentioned to you, you have the two types of sweat glands. You've got apical sweat gland that discharge in the hair follicle, or acrine that discharge on the surface, and the sebaceous gland which discharges in the hair follicle itself. And here we can see a drawing of those things where the apical sweat gland is discharging up through here in the hair follicle like the sebaceous gland, as opposed to acrine sweat gland discharges on the cell surface itself. Discharge follicles. And so this is the end of the images of epithelium and glands. I hope this is useful. If it was, please tell your colleagues about it and have them subscribe to the YouTube site. Thank you.